Welcome to On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by Review Maxer.
Hello and welcome to On Top of PR. I'm Jason Mudd with Axia Public Relations. I've joined with me today Leslie Cafferty. She is the Senior Vice President and Chief Communications Officer for Booking Holdings, the world's largest global travel company, responsible for overseeing all corporate, financial, brand, crisis, CEO, executive, and internal communication initiatives for the company, which has operations in more than 200 countries worldwide. Well, that's a lot of responsibility, Leslie. In addition, she serves as the executive sponsor for the company's employee resource group dedicated to equality and equity for women across the organization. She's a 20-year tech veteran with a passion for communications, marketing, and promoting more diversity in business. Leslie, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jason. Glad to be here.
I am glad to be here too. It looks like prior to Booking Holdings, you served as the global vice president of marketing communication at Nielsen, the world's leading global research company. Before Nielsen, you spent 8 years as the director of global communications at IAC, a leading internet company operating more than 25 leading digital brands. That's awesome. And you attended Harvard Business School and previously graduated magna cum laude from Lehigh University with a degree in international relations. That's very impressive, well qualified. Glad to have you on the show. You currently live in Greenwich, Connecticut with your husband and 3 children. You're an avid traveler, hitting 69 countries to date. In her spare time, you can be found anywhere in the world on a quest to see it all. That sounds like me.
Yeah, it's got a lot left to go. Every time I think I'm making progress, I remind myself how much more there is to do. But yeah.
Right. Well, I don't know many people who have been to 69 countries. I think that I will go to 8 this calendar year, which feels like a lot for me, and hopefully just the beginning of many more.
Yeah.
Well, we're here today to talk about the integral role of communications to business success. And glad you're here to talk about it. I think we'll cover probably some other topics, tips, and trends along the way. So, Leslie, let's get started. Tell me a little bit about what you perceive to be the integral role of communications to being successful in business.
Yeah, I think, it's really been a journey watching it over the years. I've studied international relations, as you just said, so I had no idea this is what I was going to do for a living back when I was young and studying, and like many people, sort of fell into it. But it's evolved so much. I think, my early years starting out at a big tech company, it was a function companies had, but it didn't really have a seat at the table. Communications wasn't necessarily involved in critical business decisions, and that has just changed so much now. I look at companies who really, really value. I think communications, if you're good at communications, or your team is good, you sort of sit hovering over the organization and you can see things and connect the dots and pieces and put pieces together. So, if something as small as your legal team wants to change a clause in a contract because of, a law changed, or your product team wants to change something, every decision you make in business can have very public repercussions that you didn't expect or didn't intend. And so I think where the function is really valued now is to be able to look across the board and say, hey, have we thought about this? If we do that, this could possibly happen. And so there's really, it's evolved from being, send this message out to helping businesses really make decisions about, across the spectrum of functions.
I totally agree. So what you're describing is what I would call more of like a trusted advisor.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think we've been in the business long enough that we can recall a season where, that's really what people in our line of work were asking for, was the opportunity to be that seat at the table, to be that trusted advisor. And one thing I advise my clients all the time is you can't be that trusted advisor if you are the one, managing and producing all the deliverables and overseeing all the tactics and all that. You really want to elevate your position as a trusted advisor by being available and having the schedule and the opportunity to be there to be able to guide and lead, as opposed to being in a meeting and trying to quickly get to the next thing you've got to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's there's a component to it as well. We think of communication as a one way, our job is to communicate or craft the message and send it out, but there's such an important other component, which is the listening element of it, right? So it's our job to listen. What's pop culture talking about these days? What's happening geopolitically all over the world? What's happening with our employees? What's their sentiment? What do they think about? And so you have to listen, and you can take everything you're hearing, being ears to the ground, and then really help advise the business. So I think, yeah, you're totally right, but it's definitely that two-way street that I think is a really important function that we play.
I love that, because so much of communication, good communication, is listening. But I don't know that's something that we're taught in college or even in our first entry level job. But the longer I'm in business, the more I really value it. And so, you want to look to make sure, it's interesting with the tools we have. We talked about AI before we press record, but when we do a conference call and a video call, at the end of it, it'll say, who spoke and how long they spoke and all that. And it's always interesting to see who spoke the most and who spoke the least. And, sometimes it gives me an opportunity to encourage a team member to be like, hey, you probably shouldn't be the most quiet person on this call, or you probably should have been the most quiet person on this call, just depending on the topic and the talent that's on the call kind of thing. So, for example, if you have time with the CEO, probably that time is best spent with she or he doing the talking, right? Because that's a limited opportunity to hear directly from leadership what they're trying to accomplish. Unless the meeting is a little bit different where you're reporting up, some valuable information. I remember one time I was listening to a sports radio show, and the host of the show kept talking. Meanwhile, they had the most recent Heisman Trophy winner as a special guest on the show. And unfortunately, they were just talking away instead of, taking the opportunity to help or get the information out of the guest who was the most newsworthy element. So, yeah,
you're absolutely right. I think you probably never want to be the person speaking the most or the least. Probably somewhere in the middle would be best.
Absolutely. That's a good pearl of wisdom, and one that I think is really important that we pass on to, as mentors to our team, especially the more junior and entry level people, for them to really understand. So, sometimes they get nervous and they talk a lot, or they want to be participatory, and it just depends on the environment I think that we're in. So, yeah. Leslie, tell me, what are you working on right now that's got you excited about your organization and your role at the company?
Oh, what are we working on? Well, there's so many things that get me excited. I think one, a love of travel. It's a very exciting time for travel. The world is traveling more than ever. So it's generally just high energy. And there's a ton going on in the space. I think, we are not really a travel company as much as we're truly a tech company. So we're the technology that connects people to the experiences and the trips that they want to have. And technology is changing at a rate that I think in 20 years of working in tech, I've never seen the pace of innovation in technology move so quickly. It's almost like when we, think about a new tech innovation, by the time we're done implementing it, the next best thing is out. So just working in a high energy environment is a lot of fun. That's why I love working in tech. I took 2-year stints kind of away from it at Nielsen and then came right back to tech because it is so fast paced, but it's just faster than ever before. But this, again, going back to our chat before we hit record, I think for us in communications, it's also really exciting. Yes, we've, used technology and software but we're not, I work around like hardcore tech people that code all day, and, we're not that, but it gives some of the technology, Gen AI really gives access to people who haven't studied and lived in tech, creating tech, the opportunity to really get in yourself and see what technology, the tools are so easy. So I think from a communications perspective, I'm sure, I've listened to some of your other interviews, it's a hot topic, but how can we leverage the technology to make what we do even better? And how do we do that safely? How do we do that quickly, but not too quickly that we make mistakes? We're still a public company, so you have to be very careful of everything you do and say, but it's really, really exciting. So we've created across our businesses, just within comms, we have a million for other parts of the businesses, but a task force where we're bringing back learnings. What have you tested? What have you tested? What's worked? Where did you see risk? And so that's a really exciting opportunity for us too.
Very cool. What kind of tools are you enjoying using or currently experimenting with or might recommend to our audience?
So we have, we build a lot of our tools internally. So we'll take, some of the LLM systems out there, but then augment it with our own data. And so I think the business right now priority is really building consumer facing products, right? How do we augment what we do for consumers and our partners with Gen AI? But I think where I see a ton of opportunity and where we're starting to test now is how do we build our own universe or database? I've been with the company 10 years. And when I look back for anything that we're doing, what did we say back in 2000 on, that case? Or what did we say? What was our core marketing message in this market that year that really worked? So in and of itself, we spend so much time in our own data looking for things to help inform. So if we can create a database, right, just for us that has everything that we need in it from an execution standpoint, I think we can make our teams so much more efficient. I think we can do the same thing from a measurement perspective, constantly looking back and benchmarking ourselves. We have systems and processes, but I think Gen AI can speed that up, save the time that we spend on things like measurement, make it better and make it a fraction of the time. So those are some of the early things we're looking at. We're already using it for content creation for, in social media. And I think those are the next big areas that we're looking at.
In our original communication, I saw where you have a multidimensional approach, which includes blending narrative art with data science. And I think we're just kind of starting to talk a little bit about that. Tell me more about your innovative approach and why that's important to you.
Yeah, so I think, we are a truly data-driven company. Data is in our DNA, and you sort of, nobody makes a decision in the business without it being backed by data. So you take that and then you merge it with something like communications, where, since the dawn of our industry, people have talked about, what's the ROI? How do you measure that? And we can have a whole separate podcast on measurement. But it's there are sort of softer elements to it. So there are certain things that we can measure, but there are things that we can't measure. But either way, whether it's making a decision about a financial investment in a campaign, an initiative, how many languages we translate something into, for, everything is based on data. So our team, we're not allowed to use the excuse of, oh, we can't measure it, so we have to have faith. Every decision we make should have some form of data behind it that can serve as a discussion point for how we make that decision. However, at the end of the day, the art in what we do is storytelling. And, you can be writing a speech for a CEO, or you could be, writing messaging points on a lawsuit or regulatory issue, or telling your consumer product story. But at the end of the day, that's art. You have to know how to write. You have to think creatively. So we encourage both, but we are very, very focused on data as well, making sure that we make smart decisions and decisions that we can sort of measure incremental ROI and ensure that how we're investing our time and money is improving over time.
Perfect. I love that. You mentioned measurement. Let's talk about that for a second. Tell me some of the ways that you guys are currently measuring your communications.
Yeah, it's a constant evolution. I challenge our team to every year to say, learn, test, try new things. If we're not learning, if we're not changing, in any function, you become irrelevant. So we look at this all the time. I was actually in London with my team in London a few weeks ago. We spent a day on this looking at it. But a few of the things that we look at, we have a basic ROI metric that we use, which is if, we're going to invest in a consumer campaign and it costs X amount, what are we getting for that? The cost divided by, the number, and then you can weight it for the higher quality result in, your top tier publications versus, lower. So we have a weighting algorithm. And then we look at something and we say, now every investment for a campaign, what do we project the ROI is going to be on that? And how do we do that? We look at the data from past campaigns. What were they focused on? What did they achieve? Certain things resonate in certain markets. So that's kind of one very basic. So I can't always tell my executive how many bookings we got from a campaign that generated, 1,000 pieces of coverage for us globally. But I can say, I can look and make them better and more cost effective every year. So that's one thing we look at on the social side of things, which is ever more, a component and channel that we're using. You can measure clicks back to your website, of course. You can then measure conversion. So we work a lot with our internal teams to put tracking systems around to understand when we can bring traffic in, how we're looking at that. Those are just a few, I think, of the basic examples. Things I'm allergic to some things, and maybe more traditional measurement in our space. A tool that just tells me blindly like what reach was is not really that interesting. And I don't know that if challenged by the data gurus, at our company that I could stand behind, truly believing where that comes from. What is reach? Did people really see it just because it landed on a website? So there are tools out there that I see a lot, but we actually probably use some of the more traditional metrics less than we do some of the things that I was just talking about before.
Something you said that kind of caught my attention earlier as well was just kind of talking about how, I thought it was important for our audience that maybe you share a little bit more background about the organization, specifically the brands that you and your organization are responsible for, because I bet our listeners are probably regular users of those and may not realize, based on your company name, what those organizations are.
That's a great point. So Booking Holdings probably doesn't resonate with many listeners, but you probably do know our brands. So we say we're the largest travel company. We're an online travel company, a digital travel company, a tech company. But our brands include Priceline, which anyone in the US, if you're my age, would know and remember from, probably the William Shatner days. I was quoted on that a lot. Booking.com was actually our largest brand. It's similar. It's an online travel brand. It still is based in Amsterdam. So it was the largest European equivalent of some of the US brands that now is a global brand, very, very large. And that's the majority of our presence. But we also own Kayak. We own OpenTable, dining reservations, which I hope everyone has at least used once or twice before. And Agoda is our main brand in Asia. So mostly travel focused, but we have OpenTable dining in there. All consumer facing brands, but we're platform businesses. So we have very important, B2B side of things with all of our hotel partners and flight partners and travel partners.
Well, Kayak and OpenTable are two of my most frequently used apps on my phone. So,
excellent.
So I'm definitely a regular, and those are both very helpful tools, especially when you're traveling or just leading a busy on-the-go lifestyle. It's so much easier to do those kind of things. There's still some things when it comes to booking travel I still like to do in front of my traditional computer, but sometimes you don't have that privilege or that opportunity, and so those are definitely tools in my toolbox for exploring new markets or entertaining friends and family.
That's great to hear. And I'm totally with you, because I remember when we started investing in mobile and it became I don't remember what year it was, but it became like a pivotal moment of investment for the company. I said, who on earth could ever plan, what goes into planning a vacation on an app? And of course, now I kick myself for saying that, because it is, but that's how good the technology has become that you actually can do it. But back, there was a time when it was definitely, but I'm with you. There are still some things where you still like a screen.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. With that, we're going to take a quick break and come back with more with Leslie as we talk about additional topics that I think you would be interested in as part of our audience.
You're listening to On Top of PR with your host, Jason Mudd. Jason is a trusted advisor to some of America's most admired and fastest growing brands. He is the managing partner at Axia Public Relations, a PR agency that guides news, social, and web strategies for national companies. And now, back to the show.
Welcome back to On Top of PR. I'm your host, Jason Mudd, joined by Leslie Cafferty, and we are talking more about communications and with travel and tech type companies that Leslie is leading their communication. Leslie, you are currently a Chief Communications Officer. Tell us a little bit more about that role. Maybe somebody in our listening audience is not super familiar with it, or is considering creating that position, or desires to be in that role. What advice and input would you give to them?
Yeah. So, I think one, it's great that the role exists. I think if you looked for this role 20 years ago, it wouldn't be a very common title that you'd see, on a company's leadership page. You would certainly see things like Chief Marketing Officer, and then sometimes you would have a comms, director or VP under that. And the evolution over the years, I'm seeing comms and marketing have to work hand in hand a lot, but the evolution a bit that I'm seeing is that the business sees that there's value beyond just supporting marketing, that communications can actually support the entirety of the business. So more and more you're seeing it sort of come out, stand on its own, and now more and more seeing Chief Communications Officers titles. So I think that's great for the industry. I think it's a testament to how valuable communications work is and how we can contribute to the business. So in terms of how to prepare for it, I think, I would say gone are the days where, a company had a message and so you just put it in a press release and you sent it. And then you could exist behind closed doors as a company. You didn't have to, do anything further, but that's changed. We talked a little bit about earlier, the role now is very much listening as much as it is communicating. So what you're communicating ideally is, right in tone and not tone deaf. But it's so different now. It's rarely we still use press releases, but you have to get your communications out through so many different other channels. You're not just talking to the media, you're talking to regulators, you're talking to your customers, you're talking to your supplier partners, you're talking to your employees, you're talking to your customers. So I think the spectrum of, who we're talking to is more than ever before. And I think the other thing to prepare for, if you're, interested in a path, is the intensity of it. And, there's risk when you have to make decisions in real time on what to say to position the leader or your company. But it's really exciting. I love doing it. We'll sit in a room and just share ideas, and you have to work on deadline, and so, but it comes with, risk reward, and it's definitely a high energy, high intensity career, which I love and thrive on. And you do too.
That's great. That's great. So Leslie, tell me, do you ever have a situation where perhaps, do you ever have a situation, maybe not at your company per se, but just kind of in the role of Chief Communication Officer, do you feel like with that title that communication is viewed independently from marketing, or does it still feel like a little bit of a subset of marketing? And what would be your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think, we work hand in hand with our marketing team. The marketing team sets the overarching, who are we as a company? What's our mission? What do we stand for? How do we want to present to consumers? How do we want to present to the industry? And so I think they set the tone for that. And we very much, as you know, a company is one voice. It's not many voices, and you have to be 100% consistent. So I think marketing does a really great job of setting the tone for how you want to reach your stakeholders and your consumers. But within that, the skill set is very different. Because I think, again, if you look at marketing, a lot of marketing can be a predetermined message. This is what we want to say. And then you can advertise, you can put that out there, how you want that to look. Whereas our world is a little bit different, and our skill is less creating, the perfect marketing message that we can put on a channel. And it's more that two-way conversation. So we have to be prepared for, this is what we want to say, but that's what the world is saying back to us. So how do we nuance that, and so I think we work hand in hand with marketing all the time. But we also work with other parts of the business. And I think it is that recognition that there is a distinct skill set. One is certainly not better than the other. They're just they're different skill sets. And so I think recognition of that distinct skill set is important.
Sure. We talked about how you have many brands under the umbrella there. Give me a sense of kind of what your organization or department, how it's structured. Do you have, for example, a vice president under you that is for the kayak brand, or how is that structured?
Yes. So every single one of the brands has their own sort of head of communication for the brands. And that will vary a little bit. It's a very senior role, just depending on the brand. The size is very different, but also reflective of the size of the company. So the Booking.com team is the largest team, about 65, I think. Kayak and OpenTable, a little bit smaller. Priceline smaller, and Agoda on the smaller side, but that's all reflective of sort of the markets and number of markets that they need to operate in. If you're a US brand, you don't need more than English language skill set on your communications team, right? Mm-hmm. Booking.com is a global brand, so we need multiple languages. So they're structured differently. They're allowed to sort of operate independently. They all will ultimately report into the Booking Holdings business, but they can operate independently. But we do one of the benefits of the company is we can share learnings and best practices from across. So my corporate team will also help at Booking Holdings help facilitate that, to make sure that we can share knowledge across the businesses and brands. And while they can operate independently, there are certain things that we will always have to weigh in on. Crisis situations, we'll always review major campaigns, things like that. So it's a nice kind of hybrid collaboration of independence, but the opportunity to have access to a large peer set for all of our network.
Yeah, that's great. So I started thinking as you were talking just now a little bit about, for lack of a better word, kind of compensation in the environment we've been in, where staffing, supply and demand has gone up and down since the pandemic. The cost of doing business has increased. The cost of living has increased. What are some strategies that you're doing and you might recommend to your colleagues to kind of help with the rising cost of labor and the rising cost of doing business? How has your organization kind of adopted those things?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, the cost of doing business is going up, which gets back to, we have to be smarter. You have to work smarter because you can't reduce your output. You can't reduce your impact, but you have to get smarter at how you think about execution, which is why I do think technology will create a lot more efficiency. So if you can have technology do things faster for you in certain areas without necessarily costing you more, that frees up time to do other things better, right? So being more efficient with our time spent. We may not be able to hire, 20% bigger staff for next year, but we'll have to figure out how to accomplish the same things, which is also where things like shared learnings, we have with 5 major brands, if somebody tries something and it doesn't go well, we have the ability to say, hey, here's a case study. This didn't work for these reasons, rather than having 5 teams go at it, try, all learn that it doesn't work, and then pivot to something else. So I think it's just about how do you work smart in this environment.
Well, speaking of having potentially 5 different teams try something, can you give an example of how maybe one team went and tried something and what your experience was with that versus having everybody try it all at one time?
Sure. I think a really good example was sort of in the early years. We were looking at how to do things on a tight budget and how we didn't have a ton of money for big campaigns, but how do we get out there? How do we get our brands in the news? And I don't even remember which one at the time did, but we sort of discovered the opportunity to leverage our own data. And, the media loves data and facts and insights. And so we realized as a company, we sit on piles and mounds of it. So how can we actually take that data, create really interesting stories about what's trending in travel, things that are going on, share it out? It doesn't really cost a lot of money. It's our own data. It just requires someone to curate it, put a story together. And we found we can generate a ton. And so that very quickly became a shared learning between our brands. And to this day, I'm sure somewhere, if you haven't, you will stumble upon something that says, according to Booking or according to Kayak, 50% of people are looking for this. So that was a really easy win. And funny enough, we all do compete with each other in a sense, because Priceline wants, your booking, and so does Kayak.
Absolutely, yeah.
But we've also come to learn that the pie is big enough that, when other companies and brands started sharing their data, it didn't mean that the other one couldn't get it anymore. There's enough appetite there for it. So that was one good example of a shared learning.
Well, and I think too, a rising tide floats all boats, right? So more data that's out there and more stories that are generated about traveling and booking traveling and best practices probably inspires someone to go, you know what, I want to go on a trip.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good thought for our audience today, is to consider what data do you have right now at your fingertips that is valuable outside of your organization. And sometimes it's, you're not even looking at that data because you're looking at other data that's valuable internally, but externally it could make a really good storyline or something like that. I know we've helped many companies, mostly tech companies, as I think about it, leverage data that they already have internally that would be valuable, helpful, or interesting to not only media, but general consumers all around. Leslie, would you have any tips for how to best go about doing something like that? Where to get started?
Yeah, I think it's all about collaboration with the business. And we talked about, how communications has come out. It's not seen anymore just as a subset of marketing, and how, we have seat at the table in leadership meetings. So really truly knowing, because if you don't connect with your business, I didn't even know how much data we had until I took the initiative to go look for it. And it's funny because when I did, and I went to the business, I said, show me data. I want to see what data sets do we have. And then they shared things back. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is gold. And they're like, that's interesting. And I'm like, yes, because to the point you just made, when you're working internally in a totally different focus area and your data is serving, they're not thinking with the storytelling lens that we're thinking through. So they don't know to share it. They would if they knew it would be helpful, but they didn't know that. And so you have to sort of seek and go ask. And I think that's the best, easiest piece of advice for people.
I love that. I love that. All right. We have like 4 more things I want to hit on, and I feel like we could just keep talking. So I want to kind of start focusing on 4 items as we wrap up here. And so one thing we wanted to talk about was kind of making sure your communication is driving business results. Talk to me more about that.
Yeah. So that goes back to, the ROI question. Well, how do I know that Bloomberg press hit got me any bookings? And there are things that you can't measure, but there are things that you can. But in terms of driving business impact, I mean, the first thing I always say on this, almost to, you can put a little bit of fear in your CEO. How we land a story or a message can move, if you're a public company, can move your stock price. If you're thinking about sharing, I've seen instances where companies will announce something really great, new and innovative, and they tell it that way, but it actually scares investors that they're spending or wasting too much money. And what you thought was a great story will hurt your stock price. So that's where the lens of communication is, that's not an example of selling something and generating revenue, obviously, but it's about, anything we say can create or destroy value within seconds. And so our role and our expertise is to help make sure that we're doing more of the creating and less of the destroying, of course. But I mean, I've seen really interesting instances where in our company, we do brand advertising in some big markets. We brand advertise in the US, but we're a global company and we don't spend in brand advertising everywhere. But we will do things like, data-driven insights. So we'll have communications and PR campaigns in countries where we don't brand advertise. And you see the impact, you see, brand awareness go up over time. And so I look at things like that as saying, so can I tell you exactly how much of that was attributable? But I can tell you consistently when we've turned that on in a country, you see an uptick that you don't see when you haven't. So I think there are a lot of ways that you really can say that communications can drive real business value. It also drives business value when you save a company from getting itself into trouble that then has to spend who knows how much on legal fees or, anything, whatever happened that went wrong, or investing in technology to fix a product problem. So playing that lens, we can also make sure, we can, I think, bring money into the business, but make sure we're not losing money at the same time.
Oh, that's great, Leslie. You mentioned brand awareness, and I can't help but ask you, how often and how do you go about measuring brand awareness in different markets?
It's a great question. And I would say everything we do is constant trial and error and evolution of trying new things and testing how we definitely in major markets will look at brand awareness on a quarterly level. I think should you make big decisions based on a quarter's worth of data when you're a big globally scaled company? No, probably not. But I think tracking that over time, plus if we do it once a year, you can't really account for perhaps seasonal things, or you can't, if there was a drop, it's harder to pinpoint. So we track on a quarterly basis. I wouldn't say that drives decision-making on a quarterly basis, but it does allow us to sort of, if we do see anomalies or see things that concern us, to have a better understanding of when that could have happened and then what might have caused it. How we do it is a mix of a lot of things. I mean, we use, third-party research to tell us. We try to get as many sources as we can and hope that they're relatively consistent, because that allows us to have more faith in the data, that the data might be accurate. So we will, buy research, third parties. We will do our own survey and consumer testing. So I think there are lots of different ways, and we're looking at how we continue to do that and where and how we touch consumers. But as many sources as we can for help on accuracy.
Well, for our audience, I'll just add that I've always been a big fan of measuring communication and your public relations quarter over quarter, because then you can have months, like you said, seasonality of months or something like that. And if you try to measure it, weekly or monthly, it just seems too, you do activities to measure throughout that period of time, of course. But I think that if you're looking at a high level, kind of apples to apples, measure it quarterly. And whether you have a fiscal year or a traditional calendar year, I think that's really important.
Yeah.
Okay, so this all kind of leads into the next question I had, which is, how do you manage increasing expectations for the company and on behalf of the C-suite and leadership team members?
Yeah, that's a big topic too. I think, businesses used to be responsible for delivering results, right? Return value to your shareholders. They invest and deliver. And that was really it. And, CEOs appeared 4 times a year to deliver, earnings results, and that was it. But the expectations on companies now, it's wildly, wildly different. companies are expected to have a point of view on things. People expect CEOs speak out on political topics. You have your own employees who are sort of expecting that of a company, that they take a stance on social issues. So there's a lot, and how you balance that is tricky. You know, is there a responsibility and an obligation? Well, if society is expecting that, then there is probably, to a degree. The way we think about it is really, you know, where are we qualified to speak? So if somebody, you know, we're a travel and technology company. So if, you know, there's a big piece of legislation out there about, you know, how you show fees or something like that, you know, we have sort of a right and a knowledge base. We work in the industry to maybe have a point of view on that. And maybe that's an example, I'm completely making that up, but where we might say, okay, you know, it's okay to go out and be a part of this discussion. If it's on a topic completely unrelated to who we are as a company, what our expertise is, just because a leader or an employee subset may have a point of view on a burning political or social topic, I don't think that is the time and place for a company or, you know, an executive to get involved if you don't really have the right to speak. But there's certainly no science to that. That is a lot of really, you know, paying attention, listening to what people are saying, truly evaluating if you have a right to have an opinion, and also then understanding the risks of either speaking or sometimes the risks of not speaking. So it keeps our jobs interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I appreciate you sharing that. You mentioned earlier also the idea of just kind of, I call it kind of pleasing to, you know, audiences, right? You've got the shareholder price and you've got the marketplace that you're trying to influence. And many times working with clients, you know, we've had situations where the company's doing fabulous financially, but something happened at another company that investors and analysts are just assuming the shoe's going to drop, you know, on the other foot for our particular client or something like that. And so I think that was a point I want to at least make sure that our audience didn't miss, where, you know, you said you might have a big innovative announcement, but then you scare off some shareholders because they're starting to think about, you know, how much money the company's spending on this innovation, right? And that's something that private corporations have the luxury of not having to worry about so much. And I think that they probably just take that for granted. So you have to work very closely in your role, I'm sure, with investor relations and other parties to make sure you don't send the wrong message or position something the wrong way.
Absolutely.
And it could be, as you know, you're talking to industry trade media and it gets intercepted or picked up by analysts or investors, and things could go sideways. So that's always something I've really enjoyed, is having really good colleagues in IR to lean against and collaborate with to make sure the messaging all lines up.
Absolutely. We're on speed dial.
Right. And then earlier we talked about Gen AI, and I just wanted to ask you, you know, are there any other trends that are on top of mind for you that our audience should be aware of?
I think one of the biggest trends for us to think about in communications now is just the crazy acceleration of channels that we have to be well versed in communicating on. So it was sort of, you know, back in the day, you just had to know how to write a press release. And as, you know, channels have increased, you have to learn how to talk to your customers on social media if they reach out to you, or but now even social media is becoming, if you're a global company, you know, what people use in Korea is very different than what people use in India or the US, and it's so rapidly changing. And even when you think, sometimes I hear social media as one channel kind of lumped together as a category. You know, you have to learn how to communicate on social media, but how a company communicates on TikTok or X or Instagram or Line or anything else is very, very different. So I think from a comms perspective, being comms professionals, you have to have expertise in all of those. You know, 20 years ago, I didn't have all these channels, so I'm certainly not the expert, but I have to make sure either my agency partners are experts or I have people, you know, on our team. So I think it's just keeping a pulse on how many new places there are to communicate and how you have to tailor is one of the sort of, you know, trends or things that we're keeping an eye on, as well as, and I think we touched on this earlier, just the sheer number of audiences that you're speaking to. It's society, it's the public, and your customers are also, you know, potentially the media, could be your investors. So it's just who we're speaking to and the channels at which we're speaking, it's just a massive point of acceleration.
Yeah, I think that's great. I would just summarize what you're saying by adding that the skills, talents, and responsibilities haven't changed. Just the tools and platforms and the speed of which you can communicate directly with your audience has increased, and therefore making every move you make more critical and potentially vulnerable. And so therefore you really have to be a wise strategist and an excellent communicator, and then leverage those tools. And so, with great power comes great responsibility. And a lot of these tools we're talking about gives us more power and therefore ultimately more responsibility. And all the more reason we have to really instill in our team the importance of ethics and integrity and just good best practices. So I love that we're in an age now where we have so many tools and ability to communicate 24/7, 365. It is stressful, but it is also very powerful and very beneficial when managed well.
Absolutely.
So Leslie, I want to talk about your work with diversity. I think that's important and something I want to make sure we included and close on today. So maybe you could talk a little bit more about your work ensuring diverse voices are heard, respected, and represented, what that looks like internally in the organization as well as externally.
Yeah, absolutely. I think by and large, our company, we truly believe that diversity of perspective will lend to better business. So I think internally, I'm the executive sponsor of Be Equal, which is our employee resource group promoting the growth of further development of women in our company, which I think is incredibly important. I've had an amazing career myself, and so many people along the way who have helped to guide me to make sure, to get to the level where I'm at. And I want to offer the same to the extent to which I can, but also try to bring that perspective. I think our company does a really good job understanding that diversity of thought and opinion is important for the business, but how can I also take that message elsewhere? So when I have the opportunity to do so, always try to talk about why and how we believe that's important. And from a communications perspective, it's so important because going back to what we were talking about, you have to listen to inform what to say. If you're listening to one subset of opinion, you're not getting the whole story. And I don't think we would, you then aren't doing your job well to relay back to the company, how you need to communicate. So you definitely need to be listening to. So working constantly to strive for diversity, even on our own team, to make sure we have diversity of perspective, geographically, gender, lots of, diverse opinions. So definitely think it's important and something that businesses should continue to think about and talk about both internally and externally.
I completely agree with you. It sounds like an incredible opportunity for the organization, and I've always found that it's very beneficial. The better diversity and representation you have in your organization, the less likely you are to make mistakes or gaffes or faux pas. But also, it seems like a very big challenge / opportunity when you're operating multiple brands, and more specifically, multiple global brands, that you have to be aware and sensitive and alert to managing expectations and multiple markets where values can be polar opposite from one another.
Absolutely. And we are a global company, so we have a lot of opportunity to create a really diverse workforce, which has been one of the reasons why, I love working where I work. But absolutely, we have a lot of different viewpoints on a lot of different topics, and we have to be, we have a set of values that we strive to operate by as a company, and tolerance and openness to other ideas and opinions remains one, but it doesn't mean your own employees will agree on every topic. And there are definitely challenging moments. There are challenging moments for leaders. There are challenging moments. This is I think something all companies, there was a time and place where you didn't really talk about your points of view on things in your workplace, and that has completely changed. So with diversity of perspective comes, diversity of, different points of view on different topics. And you have to be willing to accept that. And sometimes, the debate or dialogue, maybe you didn't know you were going to have, but you have to be willing to have it.
Yeah, absolutely. Leslie, I thought this was a great episode, a great conversation. I appreciate you joining us. If someone who is an audience member wants to connect with you or learn more about you, where should they go? You
can find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Excellent. Yeah. And just as a parting question for you, what is one of your favorite travel hacks or travel tips you would give somebody?
Oh, well, I'm going to say this one is for business travel specifically. I'd say, as I do a lot of it, never, ever, ever check a bag. Even if you're going to Asia for like 10 days, you have to figure out how to fit that because you'll miss too many meetings and cause yourself way too many headaches. So no matter what, never check a bag. And if my CEO were here, he would actually say that applies to all leisure travel too, because he will not pack. I mean, even for like a 2-week vacation, that's a whole different skill that I don't have. But that would be my travel hack for business travelers out there.
I'll have to replay that part for my wife because when we travel together, she loves checking a bag. And I'm like, you only love it because you haven't been burnt by it yet.
Yes,
but once you've been burnt, then you're like me and you're like, nope, not checking bags. But I always end up defaulting to checking a bag because I have to wait for her to check it anyway, and I'm like, okay, well, if we're going to have to check, I guess I'll check a bag too. But anyway, I always keep at least one change of clothes on me all the time when I travel.
Another good tip.
Yeah. Leslie, thank you so much. I really enjoyed it and appreciate you being here today.
Yes, thank you, Jason. It's been a great discussion. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So with that, that's another episode of On Top of PR. Thank you for tuning in. If you found value in this episode, 1, let us know, and 2, please share it with a colleague or friend that you think would benefit from it as well. With that, this is Jason Mudd signing off. I hope something great happens to you today.
This has been On Top of PR with Jason Mudd, presented by ReviewMaxer. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and check out past shows at ontopofpr.com.